Here we are, into autumn, starting to get cold. The least of our worries, isn't it, as human beings? Today I want to look at a divided nation as the fake messiahs. I mean, the word fake is something we all like to use in 2026, but divided nation. When I speak about divided nation, I'm basically talking about that political party that calls itself One Nation. But obviously, their policies are about dividing the nation. Now, I've seen quite an interesting spike in support for divided nation. And many people are of the opinion, or I should say an increasing number of Australians, almost 1 in 5 of voting age, are of the opinion that divided nation is a story of hope. Now, as you know, hope is the love child of desire and expectation. The desire for change and the expectation that change will occur. Any political movement which is based on a belief system and not policies needs to generate hope among its followers. So what are the issues which are allowing more and more people to join divided nation? What are those issues that attract them to this particular political party? Attracts them enough that they're willing to put their future in their hands? Well, one, it's not their policies. In many regards, in this situation, policies are almost irrelevant. And it's not even a protest vote. What we're looking at is a fundamental shift in the opinion of Australians who believe they have been cheated of their birthright. And in many regards, they're correct. Although we have 28 million people living on a continent, during the last 50 years, during the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation phase of capitalism, we have seen the dreams and aspirations of an increasing number of people dashed on the rocks. We've seen people who work hard, pay their taxes, obey the law, treated as fools. While on every available indicator, the rich grow richer and the poor grow poorer. And our ability to influence our so-called representatives to put our needs before the needs of the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication have disappeared. So obviously, people are looking for alternatives. And they do have alternatives. We do live in a parliamentary democracy, not a democratic society, but a parliamentary democracy. Every 3 years on the federal level, and every 4 years on most state levels, people cast a ballot to choose their leaders, or to choose the people that they wish to represent them. The problem is that over the last 50 years, these people, whether they're National Party representatives, Liberal Party representatives, Green representatives, Australian Labor Party representatives, have lost momentum. They have lost the ability to initiate change because of a coalition between the Australian Labor Party, the Liberal Party and the National Party, which for the last 50 years have marched to the same drum beat about the need to allow external forces determine what the parliamentary agenda is. And obviously in this situation, people look for scapegoats. They look for simple solutions. And if there is a political party that doesn't look at the reasons we find ourselves in the situation, and the reason we find our situation is the triumph of capitalism, the private investment for private profit motive, which is behind almost every human interaction in this country, and the fact that power and wealth is no longer determined by parliamentary legislation because there is a parliamentary bloc to change that will improve people's lives. Now obviously in 2026, facts don't matter. It's all about belief systems. And many of the people that are flocking to the divided nation altar looking for a messiah to solve their problems will be sorely disappointed when they realise that divided nation is supported by some of the richest people on this planet. They'll be sorely disappointed when the realities of the climate emergency have an increasing impact on their day-to-day lives. They will be severely disappointed when any arrangements which have been made by First Nations people are torn up because they believe that First Nations people receive more assistance than they do. They'll be sorely disappointed when the number of migrants is reduced dramatically in this country and we turn away from a populate or perish philosophy which successive Australian governments have supported since the end of World War II, when they will find that those policies don't increase their wages. Those policies, divided nation policies, don't improve their situation, don't help their children get ahead. But obviously, we are at a significant moment in political history in this country, and people are begging for solutions. And the so-called progressive movement in this country has been involved in internecine warfare regarding terminology, regarding feelings. So people are looking for alternatives. The fact is, there are independents and sections of the Green Party that have policies which are based on the levelling of power and the redistribution of wealth in this country. Although the Australian Labor Party, commonly known as the Alternative Liberal Party, has a massive 40+ seat majority in the House of Representatives and a friendly Senate where the Greens hold the balance of power, we are not seeing change. We continue to see the same clique control the economy, control the legislative agenda, and it is in their best interests for us as Australians, whether they're permanent residents or citizens, to squabble amongst each other for the crumbs which are brushed off the corporate table. And that's the reality we face. And flocking to divided nation is like following a fake messiah. It's like the lemmings jumping off to their death off a cliff face. The fact is, although the momentum for change lies with the orange people, the divided nation people, the fact is, as we see in the US of A, where people who have got similar policies to divided nation rule that nation, what we are seeing is that the policies which are being implemented do nothing to improve the lives of the majority of people and do everything in terms of increasing insecurity in the United States of America. So people are faced with a very difficult decision. If they participate in parliamentary politics, what do they do? If they're totally alienated by the lack of policies which encourage people to get on with their lives because they feel a sense of personal security, not just economically, but security as a nation. What's the point in poking a stick at the Chinese bear? What's the point of attaching ourselves to a political movement and a political party which is more than happy to increase insecurity in this country by pushing us towards a war which nobody wants? All you have to do is look at the carnage in Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank and Iran to understand how destructive modern warfare is. With minimal loss of life from an aggressor, we can see massive destruction and massive loss of life among civilians. And don't believe that if we as a people continue to support political parties which support this artificially designed confrontation for the Chinese government in this part of the world, that we are no longer immune because of our geographical isolation from having massive, catastrophic situations occurring in this country. But that's the issue. So the issue is that in 2026, facts have become irrelevant. And although people are dissatisfied and are flocking to the one nation, the divided nation banner, the problem is their policies divide the nation. They pit Australians against Australians. They pit unionists against non-unionists. They pit immigrants against people who've been here a couple of generations. They pit the poor against the poor because of differences of religion or languages people speak. So the fact is that divided nation is just that. It's a political movement that will divide the nation. And if by some chance they form a coalition with the Liberal Party and rule this country, what we'll see is the introduction of authoritarian legislation which will ensure that that division is cemented in law. At the same time, we need to understand that support for divided nation is support for war, support for military engagement with the Chinese government. And as a minnow in a sea of killer whales, our future will not be determined which killer whale we support. It will only be determined by our ability to form associations with our neighbours in surrounding sovereign nation states. So if you are thinking of supporting divided nation because you think the fake messiahs provide you with hope for change that will improve your life, then maybe, just maybe, you should look at the facts. I know facts are unpopular in 2026. I know that belief and feelings are the currency of 2026. But the problem is, facts don't go away. They determine your future, my future, and the future of future generations. They determine the future of this country. And the facts are, there is an increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots in this country. And that gap is not primarily determined by the colour of somebody's skin, the language they speak, whether they're immigrants or asylum seekers, whether they were born here, whether they're first generation or second generation, whether they're First Nations people. The fact is, we all find ourselves in this situation because the increasing concentration of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands, in an economy which is manipulated to improve the fortunes of the haves, in an economy and a society which is manipulated to ensure that we fight amongst each other about what are essentially peripheral issues and don't look at the reasons we find ourselves in this situation in 2026. Where in a nation of 28 million people living on a continent, each and every one of us should be living the life of Riley. Each and every one of us. But the problem is, when you have a blockage in Parliament which refuses to allow legislation to be passed to make fundamental changes to this society, fundamental changes based on power and wealth. Unless we have those type of political movements, it doesn't matter how many fake messiahs there are on the planet. It doesn't matter what you believe in. It doesn't matter what religion or you follow. It doesn't matter where you come from. The fact is that ultimately, it's not the fake messiahs from Divided Nation or the alternative Liberal Party masquerading as the Australian Labor Party, or the National Party, which has finally rediscovered its roots, denying any support for deregulation and corporatisation, but keeping their mouth shut about privatisation. So the reality is, people are looking for change. That change will not occur by following the false prophets in Divided Nation. That change will not occur by following the false prophets in the alternative Liberal Party masquerading as the Australian Labor Party and the government of the day. That change won't come by supporting the Liberal Party, an ossified remnant of an ideology which has been proven to be wrong over and over again. It could come from the Greens. if they moved away from those internecine battles regarding language, gender. The fact is, we find ourselves in this situation where people flock to join the orange mob, the divided nation mob, because they believe there are no alternatives. They don't want to go down the path which the progressive, so-called progressive movement has gone in this country. They don't want to go down the path of the Alternative Liberal Party, masquerading as the Australian Labor Party, or the Liberal Party or the National Party. So they're looking for alternatives. But if you are looking for alternatives, I suggest you look a bit further than Divided Nation. Look at those political organisations, those community groups, which are working to devolve share power and which are working to ensure that wealth is held in common and used for the common good, not to enrich a minuscule number of people in this country. And if you are interested, you could always join public interest before corporate interests, where our policies put the interests of the many before the interests of the few, where we understand that the situation we find ourselves in is related to a lack of power and our inability to share the wealth that is generated in this country.